All right, I promised to you that we would talk about something like a love square today, and my goal is to get through the end of part one. I will certainly get through the end of part three of part one into part four, but I probably will not quite finish it. So let me outline at a rate what it is that we're going to talk about today, and perhaps also Friday, almost certainly Friday as well. We are going to talk about Don Quixote's time in the Sierra Morena. This is very much a precursor of what we see in part two in the cave of Montesinos. We will talk about the love square between Dorotea, Don, Fernando, Luscinda, and Cardenio. Cardenio, the wild man that we meet out in the Sierra Morena. We'll talk a little bit about the interpolated novel, The Man Who Was Recklessly Curious, and then about the Moorish princess beauty, Zoraida, and her father Haji Murad, and how that connects itself to Cervantes' own experiences with having worked as a soldier and then having lost a naval battle and part of his hand from cannon fire, and then being a slave for several years before the money was raised by his family in order to purchase him back. All right, Don Quixote has made his way to the Sierra Morena. The Sierra Morena is a place where he can play now not so much a knightly role, but a pastoral role. So there are two genres present and being made fun of, criticized, satirized by Don Quixote at the moment. The first we know are the novels of chivalry, based on King Arthur, the legends of his 12 knights, the infidelities of Lancelot, and also the incestuous relationship between Morgana and Arthur. Something interesting to note is that incest is often considered the royal or the divine prerogative. We look back at Greek mythology, the Roman mythology, the king and queen of the gods are brother and sister, for example. Egyptian mythology, similar things happen, as well as the Egyptian pharaohs would often sleep with each other. And you might say, that's pretty weird. How long did it take for us to get past that? And I'd say it took a long time because the idea just sort of got extended, right? The idea of royalty and of blood containing something special in somebody is an old idea that continues to exist, by the way. And that at least existed through royal bloodlines in Western Europe until the 18th, 19th centuries, when the King of Spain might himself be German and married to a woman of French extraction. These nobles, they may have been at the head of particular countries, yet many of them were still related. So maybe not brother, sister, but still often very much cousins. In any case, Don Quixote has just seen his first sort of pastoral romance, where we had a woman who named Marcella in Crisostomo, a woman who had eschewed her social role as a woman, had left the city, and had even left her clothing, her female clothing at home, and had taken on the identity, the habits, and the mannerisms and the home of a shepherd. Out in the woods, one can be what one wants to be in this world. There are no maids, there are no laws, there are no kings or queens of the woods. And so the woods are a place where somebody can have a mutable identity. So Don Quixote himself, we have questions about how mutable and static his identity is. In fact, is he Don Quixote? Is he a knight? Or is he a crazy man named Alonso Quijada? This is something very interesting to think about. Well, he decides that it is time for him to do penance in the Sierra Morena, very similar to what was done by his two poetic predecessors, Roland, as well as Amadis de Gaul. He's going to do penance in order to show his lady love, Dulcinea, how devoted he is as a knight. So he wishes to do things in the Sierra Morena that show him to be crazy. One of them will be that he will strip down the bottom half of his clothing, take him off, and do cartwheels in front of Sancho after Sancho actually begs him, please don't do any of that in front of me because your battered, disgusting body makes me so sad that it makes me want to cry. And remember that Don Quixote has taken many, many hits by this point, from the windmill, from the bath, from the innkeep, from the people in the inn. Sancho has also been thrown in the blankets, never forgets that. And these guys are, it's like they're at the end of Mardi Gras week. It's a rough, they're looking pretty rough at this point. So Don Quixote decides that he's going to do penance out in the woods. Well, what is the problem with his rationale? He's doing penance in the woods in order to show his lady Dulcinea how much he is devoted to her. This suggests that A, Dulcinea needs to be real. B, somehow she needs to get the information from the Sierra Morena to her. Now, not to make a blasé point, but they obviously don't have iPhones. They don't have email. They don't have they don't have photographs. And Sancho is not good with a pen, so he can't draw. He can't even write. Sort of funny. You probably think drawing is harder than writing, but I wonder with somebody illiterate what they would think about that. In any case, it means that Sancho is going to have to see Don Quixote do some crazy things, like take off his pants and then do a cartwheel in front of Sancho. And I mean, think of the image. It's a laughable, risible image, right? Why would it be his lower extremity? Cervantes is putting it in our faces, as it were, not just Sancho's. And we all are having to imagine Don Quixote, and it's like, Cervantes, a little bit crude, a little bit lewd. So Sancho has to see this. And then Don Quixote must construct a letter. Remember that Sancho can't construct a letter because he's illiterate. Give it to Sancho, and Sancho must then find Dulcinea. Dulcinea, in order to receive a letter, must be either real in the way that Don Quixote imagines, or at least based on a real lady, Aldonza Lorenzo. So here is something key, particularly to your second paper. At this point in part 3 of part 1, Sancho says, Aldonza Lorenzo, I know her. Let me make sure that I get the details right here. I might take me. Okay, there we go. Mm-hmm. Yes, he says he knows her well. This means that she must be real, according to what Sancho explicitly says at this point, chapter 25, in the first part. And in fact, he says that he knows her father, that they're almost neighbors, and I think he says that she threshes wheat really, really, really well. And this is the sort of thing that a peasant woman, rather than a noble lady, would do. Later on, well, so Sancho is then sent with, because he's lost his donkey to Gines de Pasamonte, the galley slave stole his donkey, and then threw rocks at him. There's another instance of Sancho and Don Quixote being harmed. Cardenio also beat them up after Don Quixote interrupts his story and argues with him about Queen Madasima from Amadis de Gaul, and she couldn't possibly have been in a relationship with a surgeon. Doctors, you may know, even though it's sort of a refined, high-level position in contemporary America today, traditionally speaking, in the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance, it was considered sort of a quack job, in the same way that people used to talk about therapists. It was considered a job where people lied and inflated their prices. And I mean, there are even poetries from some of the Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages that I read that say that doctors are even better than death because they get paid for killing people. They don't just do it naturally. So, so if you're scared of doctors, I wouldn't read ancient, medieval, or even fairly modern texts about them. These days, though, they are in fact much, much better. The last 100 years have been very good for the profession. In any case, Sancho takes Rocinante and the letter of Don Quixote to where this real woman should be. But he gets caught up along the way. Who should see him but the priest and the barber? The priest and the barber see him riding what? Rocinante. Whose horse is Rocinante? Don Quixote. Where's Don Quixote? Not with him. What do you think they think when they see Sancho come back without Don Quixote with Rocinante? They tell him. They tell him explicitly. They say, Sancho, you better stop. He says, no, I've got to do this thing. They're like, no, you have to stop because we think you robbed and killed Don Quixote. So you better stop right now. And he says, no. You don't understand. I'm taking this letter to Dulcinea. And when I do, she's going to give me, I think, I can't give you the exact number, and I don't want to take away from my credibility, but multiple cattle, 2 or 3 donkeys. It's something that would be well worth Sancho's time to receive. So the priest and the barber say, oh, you have a letter? Show it to us. And Sancho goes into his pocket and takes out, what does he take out? Takes out nothing. He forgot to take the letter from Don Quixote. And so he starts to rip out his hair because not only is he now being accused of murder and theft, but also he's not going to get the counter that he was going to get. He's so extremely frustrated by this. And so he starts to lay out exactly what he has been doing with Don Quixote, where Don Quixote is, and the priest and the barber, who are themselves literary men, come up with an idea. They're like, oh, okay, Don Quixote is out in the Sierra Morena. We need to get him back home because he's crazy. What could we do in order to get him? Well, we could ourselves play new roles. And keep in mind always the idea of somebody in a fictional book being in disguise. You never actually see them. So what does it mean for you as the reader to have a priest who you've never seen, then take on put on a fake beard and play a role that is not a priest? How is that, to your internal eye, any different from him just being a totally new character, right? A character in disguise in the book. How is that any different from just a new character to your own eyes? Just something we're kind of thinking about with the nature of fiction. It's all lies anyway, isn't this just an equal lie? So Sancho makes it back to the town, back to the priest and the barber, has to give them account of where Don Quixote is. They take control of the situation. Now, what has not happened yet? This is essential that you have this point. What has not happened? What has Sancho not done? What has he failed to achieve? I like that you pause there. He can't give the letter to Aldonza Lorenzo Dulcinea. He does not give the letter because he doesn't even have the letter. And later on, the question will arise, is Dulcinea even real? And not only is she an imaginary construct put on a real lady, Aldonza Lorenzo, in part two, Aldonza Lorenzo disappears. Dulcinea is no longer even based on a real person. And that will be something you might want to write about, where you say, was this a mistake of Cervantes, or did he intentionally put this error in this text in order to confuse us? That's something I'm very much interested in you thinking about. In any case, he does not give the letter. So let me shoot back a little bit and talk about this love square a little bit. Man, I have some notes on this. But I'm going to try and just sort of give it to you as it is, because I don't really like to read. Have you all noticed that when somebody lectures, it's a lot more engaging than when they read something and aren't focused? It's sort of a fun thing. You should note that that's the same when you lecture, too, by the way. So if you ever give a presentation, if you can get a little bit away from your slides, your professors will be impressed. They'll be like, wow, you actually know what you're talking about. You're not just reading what you don't yet know and are hoping that you somehow absorb during the course of a presentation. You see their steps. In any case, when Don Quixote makes it into the Sierra Morena, he sees a wild man who he finds out from the shepherd who's guided him is sometimes in his wits and sometimes out. So who does he sound like? Somebody who is sometimes out of his wits and sometimes very eloquent and intelligent. Sounds a bit like a figure of Don Quixote, yes, our protagonist, indeed, who is himself sometimes very, and you'll see this especially in part two, sometimes he is extremely intelligent when it comes to philosophical, ethical issues. When he talks about the role of a leader, the role of a servant, what love is, he says things that are not simply poetic but are insightful. But then when it comes to his own life, he's clearly crazy. And not just, again, because of my own perception, all who meet him perceive him as crazy, which is something you may want to write about, the social sort of relationship between action and sanity. Is insanity just a physical condition, or is it a social condition? A condition in which you act in such a way as to seem crazy to those around you. Is that in any way different from actually being physically caused to be crazy? And I could say something about different cultures and different roles in cultures, but one thing I'll say about, say, America is that people with different jobs spend their time doing insanely different things. Somebody who's an ultra runner might spend their time. So I know somebody running a 1,000-mile trail right now. She is running 50 miles a day in order to do it in 20 days. I also know lawyers who spend 12 hours a day at an office, sitting, staring at screens, and spending 6 hours a day billing. These are very different ways to spend one's time. And so if one of those people were to look at how the other one lived, they'd probably say, man, I'm in some nice leather chair at a nice law firm, and I see somebody out in the dirty dealing with snakes and ticks and sweating all the time and caring about how much electrolytes they have in them. I think that's pretty crazy sounding. But they might also see somebody living in the air conditioning, not moving much during the course of the day, caring about charging people money for legal services. And that person might say that sounds, and the runner might say that sounds crazy. In other societies, particularly less developed ones, you have roles of people who are like medicine. What is a medicine? It's like a mix of a religious prophet and doctor. If somebody were to walk around trying to be one of those here, it'd probably be, the person on the street yelling at you that you try and walk by on the other side of it. So you might perceive somebody that has an active and important role in a different society where they can be interrelated to this one as crazy. And so that's all just very much tangent so that you think about what insanity is. Cardenio and Don Quixote do appear to actually be insane. So the goat herd tells about a young and handsome man coming. So he was once young and handsome and well put together. Now he is more haggard looking, his clothes are ripped, and he lives inside of a cork tree. I've known one person who did that before. He's a funny guy. His name's Tom. He is himself performing a penance, and he seems to have a craziness that comes over him, and he yells out about this person called False Fernando. Occasionally he steals food, and when the craziness comes upon him, even those who bring him food so that he can survive, these goat herds who know about this crazy guy who looks like a young nobleman who's come to live in a cork tree, they leave him food, but occasionally he lashes out at them, even though they are helping him out. This is, in fact, he is dubbed the Ragged Man of the Gloomy Face, and which a little bit on the nose, right? To make the connection between the Ragged Man of the Gloomy Face and, of course, the Knight of the, anybody remember? Sorrowful Face or Countenance. Yes, very good. And remember, I like countenance. This is a mix of how you look and how you look at people, right? Your look is a little bit different from just your face. I'm told that certain people, they have a way of holding their faces. I'm told that I even have one. It reminds people of us. There are a couple of actors that I sometimes get compared to who are older actors that you probably wouldn't know. But one apparently holds his mouth in the same way I do. Jeffrey Donovan from Burning. In any case, what is the love square that I've been talking about? I want to make sure that I hit this and hit this hard. Cardenio is a young man who fell in love with the woman Luscinda. Now, something to keep in mind here is the differences in class between some of these. Don Fernando, who's going to come in a second, is a Don. He is of noble rank, whereas Cardenio, Luscinda, and even this lady Dorotea that we learn about a little bit afterwards are more middle class. They're closer to Don Quixote's rank. So something that Don Fernando has working for him is that if he wants to marry a middle class girl, it's going to be very difficult for that middle class girl's parents to turn him down, particularly if she loves another middle class guy whose parents are thinking about the future and not just the present feelings of their daughter. Now, Cardenio and Luscinda fall in love with each other. Cardenio is about to propose to Luscinda. However, the Duke, who owns the land on which his father serves, summons him to his court. So Cardenio goes to the court. At the court, Cardenio becomes friends with the second son, the younger son of Don Fernando, of the Duke, Don Fernando. Don Fernando himself mentions that he had a liaison with a local girl, but pretty soon he's going to have to get away from town because of that. Prior to that, however, Cardenio fills Don Fernando's ears with how beautiful Luscinda is. She's so beautiful. She's so beautiful. This is itself a type of story that goes all the way back to Herodotus. I'll say that I'm forgetting the names, and very sorrowfully, I think it's actually Croesus here, but the old story in Herodotus, ancient Greek, yeah, is that there was a king who had a very beautiful wife, and he was like, "My wife is so beautiful." To his advisor, "You should come see her in the nude." The advisor thinks, "That's a terrible idea. I do not want to see your wife. I don't want to see your wife." And he says, "No, no, she's very, very beautiful. You really do want to see her." And he demurs until the king says, "I command it." And so the advisor then hides, sees the wife. However, little wrinkle in the plan, the wife catches him. And she then presents him with an ultimatum. Either you die because you've seen me, or you become my husband, and my former husband dies because you've seen me, because only my husband can see me. You can imagine which choice the advisor makes. And the sort of idea there is that even if you have something of tremendous value, you shouldn't perhaps brag about it, because then that can create covetousness, or that can create conditions of covetousness or avariciousness in those around you. In any case, I say that's because Cardenio's comments about Luscinda flame the desire of Don Fernando. And we already know that he's a little bit lascivious. He already has this background with this local girl that he needs to get away from. So he's a little bit of a Don Juan, Don Giovanni sort of character. He then makes the conditions. He decides he wants to purchase several horses that he then has Cardenio sent to acquire. While Cardenio is sent to acquire these horses, Don Fernando returns to the original town where Cardenio is from, meets Luscinda, offers his hand in marriage to the parents. This is Don Fernando, son of the Duke. The parents accept. The parents accept. Cardenio returns back, very much like The Graduate, if you've ever seen with Dustin Hoffman, and the wonderful denouement near the end, where there's a marriage scene and a huge scandal comes about. Cardenio makes it to where the ceremony is taking place, and he's dying on the inside as he watches the I-dos. And he thinks that Luscinda is going to speak against Don Fernando, but instead she says the hated words, himself faints. And Cardenio, thinking that he would jump out and use his knife, perhaps against the hated Don Fernando and Luscinda, and then against himself, then instead loses his mind and runs out to the Sierra Morena, because he had been so betrayed by his friend. I mean, really think about that. Your friend tells you the thing that you love most in the world and then goes to take it from you. So it's an ugly situation. This situation is found out about when we meet Luscinda, when the priest and the barber meet. I'm going to pause on that for a moment, because actually what happens is the priest and the barber hear about this situation. Okay. Okay, this is where I want to be. So Cardenio tells this story to the priest and the barber while they are on the way with Sancho in order to find Don Quixote. They then meet at the end Juan Palomeques and a young lady, or excuse me, right outside of it, who has he's described as having very beautiful feet that indicate that she's either not a man or not a shepherd. Very interesting sort of note there. And it turns out that this lady has known a man who contrived a plan to get all of her family servants. He bribed them in order to allow him in at night so that he could consummate his relationship with her. The name of this girl is Dorotea. She says that her family is almost noble, not quite. And who is the man who had bribed her servants, who liked her so much, who then flees after consummating his love with her? This is Don Fernando. And so things come full circle. We see that Don Fernando has actually seduced a girl named Dorotea, who has now taken on the garb, like Marcella, of a shepherdess. And in fact, is taken on the role of, she looks male rather than female. And so Don Fernando must have slept with her, used the opportunity to get away from his town presented by Cardenio to go to the town where Luscinda was, and then marry Luscinda. So, wow, he's betrayed at least a couple major people. Dorotea, who he made so many promises to, his friend Cardenio, seems to be in quite the spot. One thing that Luscinda had that Cardenio did not see during her wedding to Don Fernando, excuse me, trying to keep things straight, is that she actually had a dagger on herself. But what is it that she did after she's asked whether she takes this man as her lawful husband? She faints, she swoons. So she doesn't have a chance to either stab him or herself. So when Cardenio sees her faint, he has no idea that this is in the wake of her decision to murder/commit suicide because she actually loved him. He can't possibly know that she still feels strongly for him, and in her heart of hearts does not actually want to marry Don Quixote. You can see the masterfulness of this situation coming out when people are acting based on assumptions that are not true. Romeo and Juliet, for example, when Juliet thinks Romeo is dead and kills herself, and then Romeo sees that she kills herself and kills himself. This is itself based on an Ovidian story called Pyramus and Thisbe, two neighbors who met each other through a hole in a wall, and then go to meet out on a plain. But Pyramus, the boy, sees Thisbe's. She tears a bit of her traveling cloak, and it stays on a bush, I think a mulberry bush. And he sees it there, and then he sees a lion. He thinks the lion has eaten her, so he stabs himself. And then she comes out as he's dying. She sees that he's dying, and then she kills herself. So young love is a very sad sort of thing, but this is a story in the tradition of that story. All right. I want to make sure I don't miss any nice detail here, but I think that's an okay encapsulation of the love square as it is. All right. Okay. Like I said, the priest and the barber meet a cross-dressing shepherd. He's the former lover of Don Fernando named Dorotea. Cardenio starts to perspire when he hears Don Fernando's name as she's telling her own story. So he knows who she is. He knows who she's talking about, but he does not reveal at first. We find out about Don Fernando bribing her servants. We find out that her parents were worried about the difference in rank between Don Fernando and her, apparently for good reason. Part of the knowledge of that is, and this becomes a story that Lord Byron writes, as well as Mozart writes an opera about, the sort of Don Juan story. The idea is that a noble, a high-ranking man, sort of goes out into the world and looks for women of lower rank to seduce. And in fact, this is something that happens over and over and over in the Don Juan story, as well as the Don Giovanni story. I mean, this seemed to be a practice that was so common, or at least so commonly believed or told stories about, that there are entire large operas and poems written about it. And so the parents were worried that he would try to take her chastity, take her honor, without putting a ring on it, as it were, and looks like with good reasons. In any case, Dorotea is maid, eventually leaves the room, and Dorotea ceases to be one, ceases to be a maid. A maiden is synonymous with virgin, and that is something that she is not after her night with Don Fernando. Don Fernando gives Dorotea a ring, but doesn't return after the second night. Then she hears that Luscinda was married to Don Fernando in a nearby town, which we talked about. Dorotea then donned her shepherd's garb, took some goods from her home, and a man tells Dorotea that a letter was found on Luscinda saying that she could not be Don Fernando's wife because she was already Cardenio's. This must have been found very close to the dagger that she had at the wedding. She had intended to kill herself, even had a dagger on the person, People say that Don Fernando either tried to use the dagger or ran away immediately upon discovery of this. This is just after Cardenio runs away. So Cardenio sees the end of the ceremony, but he doesn't see what happens as a result of it. He doesn't see that they discover the letter on Luscinda. He doesn't see that they discover a dagger on Luscinda. Had he seen these things, would he have gone crazy in the first place? Very, very interesting interplay of how information or lack of information can deeply affect and disturb your own emotions. Again, the example I like to use is when somebody plays a trick on you. Like say it's your birthday, and say I'm your best friend. And you're like, hey man, isn't it a special day? And I'm like, it's like Wednesday, man. And you're like, just like any Wednesday? And I'm like, I don't know, isn't it Wednesday? And then you start to get kind of upset with me, right? And I'm like, whatever, man. But then 3 hours later, you come back to your dorm or apartment, and oh, there's a surprise party. The question you might well wonder is, were your emotions that you felt towards me when you were upset at me legitimate? Right? Your feelings were real of betrayal, of being upset, and yet the conditions that produced them were fictional. It should tell you something about you as a creature. Why do you like to watch opera? Why do you like to watch TV? Why do you like to watch movies? Probably because you feel some emotion as a result of them. But you know that they're lies. And yet you'll accept the lies just because you want to feel the emotion? Is that the sort of creature that you are? Why does fiction exist? Why don't people just read facts all day? Why do many people, prefer to read things that are not facts? It's almost like you care more about feeling than about seeing truth as a being. Perhaps you personally don't. In any case. All right. Cardenio then comes forward and says that he knows Dorotea for who she is because he knows her father. They give each other hope. They give each other hope that in this convoluted, terrible situation in which Don Fernando has wronged both of them, right? Stole Cardenio's fiance, basically, and also made promises to Dorotea that, I'm going to marry you. We're basically married already. We can lie together because I have not lied to you. And yet he had defrauded. He had acted in bad will. This is a form of fraud, by the way. 8th circle out of 9 circles of hell for Don Quixote. And I'll get you in white-collar prison these days here in the States. The Fire Festival, look it up. That guy went to white-collar, defrauding a lot of people out of their money. Well, given the nature of this text and the interplay between reality and fiction, insanity and sanity, you might expect that if restitution is going to come to this situation, that it's going to come through some sort of play act, through another fiction within the fiction. So, the priest and the barber come up with an idea. They think, Dorotea, if you help us to get our friend Don Quixote back, we think we can help you to get back at Don Fernando. But you have to play this role right now. You must become no longer Dorotea, but Princess Micomicona. And Princess Micomicona has an evil giant named Hondo Philando, who's like everybody lover, a philanderer. It's like a luster after people. Philos, love, andros, man. You can also have more particular meanings. Andros means particularly male man, as opposed to gunos, like a gynecologist, which means female. Anthropos means human, as the word anthropology studies human, and what it is. Whereas it's like misogyny, like anger or what is it? To despise women. Whereas misandry, slightly less common word, is to despise men. And misanthropy is to just despise humans. He's missing. For example, very famous play by Moliere. So, what's going to happen? They find Don Quixote in the Sierra Morena. And Princess Micomicona, recall that this is Dorotea in disguise, disguises. He requested Don Quixote help her defeat a giant, Fernando, but not take on any new quests while he is questing for her. Why would she require this oath from him? What are the priest and the barber actually attempting to accomplish with this ruse? What is their goal with Don Quixote? He's in the Sierra Morena acting like a chivalric knight. What does he need to be doing? What do they wish for him to do for his own safety? He's got to go back home. And so she needs to convince him to go on a quest with her to defeat this giant. So ideally, they're going to have to suggest the giant is where? In his home. And so, okay, so they've constructed this elaborate fictional ruse in order to get this character who thinks that he's living within a fictional world, which in fact he actually is, since he is a character in the book. So perhaps he's the least crazy of any of them. Interesting thing to say. We all live in a simulation. We do it differently. If you do it for a fact, perhaps not. Yeah, you should really think about that. In any case, they're going to try and get Don Quixote back, and he does agree to these conditions. And it's a good thing that he does so, because at the end he almost takes on another quest. And keep in mind that this is perhaps itself a criticism of this sort of literature and of Don Quixote up until this point. The things just keep happening and happening and happening, and there's no unity between these episodes. And so finally, in order to bring things to a conclusion, there must be something must draw the threads together in order to wrap things up. In any case, let's see. Yes, it's ripping of the beard of the barber, and a quick thinking by the priest helps them get out of that. They then head to and through the village of Don Quixote. Princess Micomicona, in meeting Don Quixote, has several slips of her memory because she has memorized a fable to tell to him. But since she's memorized a lie, she forgets certain aspects of it, like suggesting that there is water near where she is from, when in fact it is landlocked. You find out the name of Fernando. Let's see. Okay, yes. Also, Sancho, during this interaction, starts to become quite upset with Don Quixote. Recall that he didn't see Dulcinea, and he was sent to give a letter that he had not taken with him to her, and that he had thought that she was Aldonza Lorenza, somebody who's good at threshing wheat. Since he has never seen Dulcinea, and insofar as he knows Dulcinea exists, she is not a real princess. And as far as he knows, Princess Micomicona is a real princess because he's not in on the ruse. What do you think? And because Don Quixote has promised to give him some share of the goods that he wins as a knight, when Don Quixote is confronted with a real princess who is beautiful, what do you think Sancho wishes he would do? Though I don't know that he really has the opportunity. He wants him to marry her. And yet Don Quixote says, no, I can't possibly marry this Princess Micomicona with this real kingdom, Micomicon. I am Dulcinea's man. And so Sancho, no need to be angry. And this is one of the many moments where Sancho's realism comes into real conflict with Don Quixote's idealism, because the levels of absurdity there are two or three of them, right? On the one hand, Princess Micomicona is not an actual princess, but if she were an actual princess, then Sancho might be in the right to suggest that Don Quixote pursue a woman who is in fact a princess rather than just imagined to be a princess. However, the problem with Sancho's reasoning is that since he's not in on the ruse, he doesn't realize that Princess Micomicona is just as much a princess as Dulcinea is. See the layers to this. This is when people ask what makes literature great or what makes something masterful, it's having intertwining layers that work well together. That's one of the major aspects. This is not a simplistic narrative. It's difficult to maintain a line. It would be difficult to describe this to somebody intelligently without being too general, which perhaps I struggle with myself. In any case, Don Quixote says, I'm going to marry Dulcinea. Sancho says, I've never even seen Dulcinea. I don't even know if she's real. Don Quixote says, how is that possibly true? because you said that you delivered my letter to her, and so Sancho starts to be caught in his own lies, which is itself a nice exploration of the relationship between fiction and lying and tricking. He then retracts that and says, I didn't look very closely at her, and Don Quixote asks for additional information about Dulcinea, and Sancho admits that he didn't take the letter. And it's a good thing that he does admit that to Don Quixote, because Don Quixote shows that he knows that he had kept the letter. But Sancho says that he had memorized. We know from his conversations with the priest and the barber that he sort of memorized it. He remembered some good moments, but not most of them. In any case, yes, I mentioned this earlier, but I guess it comes here in chapter 31. Sancho just continues his description of Dulcinea. Don Quixote asks how she smells. It's a very interesting question, particularly about somebody that one is amorously inclined, or does she smell like sweat or perfume? Sancho says that Dulcinea could not read Don Quixote's. So he asks also, what was her reaction when she read my letter? And he says, well, she can't read, but she also said that she didn't want the letter read by anybody, because she didn't want anybody to know her business, but that, of course, would result in her not hearing the contents of the letter and therefore not knowing what Don Quixote had said in the first place, which serves Sancho's lie. Of course, he didn't have the letter on him. Let's see. And when asked how many of the men that Don Quixote sent back to tell her of the valorous deeds of Don Quixote, like the galley slaves that were sent, and Andres, only the Basque apparently went to find her. Okay. We also meet Andreas again, who was, of course, the boy who was being beaten in that very, very first episode when Don Quixote was first showing his valorous chivalry, and he says that he wished he'd never met Don Quixote, because as a result of his interaction with Don Quixote, his master became so angry at him that he beat him mercilessly, and now he has had to run away. Okay, next time what we're going to do, now that the stage is set, now that the priest and the barber, Princess Metempsychosis, who is actually Dorotea, and Sancho have all met back up with Don Quixote, it's time for him to start to return to his home. It's time for him to go on his final quest of part 1, to see whether we can restore the honor of Dorotea, restore the sanity of Cardenio, and do justice to Don Fernando. All right.